Okay. My name is Hannah Grant Lusignan, and I have testified before as a member of Silent No More. We are a campaign for awareness of the grave impact that abortion has had on the lives of many women and men who regret their abortions. And I have one question before I begin my testimony. May I approach to give you this note? Okay. This is from Julie Lamine. This is directly for Representative Aiello. Yep. If you could hand that to her, and the rest is statistical information, current statistical information. So I, along with many of the testimonies that have been spoken today, struggled with, which way to speak about this. I'm certainly not, I don't consider myself in any way, shape, or form credentialed, as so many people have come up here and identified themselves either through their education or various professional titles. But nevertheless, I am going to make this testimony in honor of my mother, or my foster mother, who just passed away in December. And she became my foster mother when I was 11 years old. Her name is Deborah Thompson. She was one of the founders of Dorcas Place, which is now Dorcas Place International. Maybe you have heard of it. It's an agency in South Providence, working primarily with poor men and women, immigrants, teaching women and men literacy skills and English as a second language, and various other educational services. The reason I bring that into my testimony is because when I came to live with my aunt, I came out of a situation that was very terrible for me and for my brothers and sisters. We were abused, we were impoverished, and we did not have much opportunity, and maybe even our lives were certainly endangered very often. I'm not saying maybe, they certainly were endangered very often by very abusive and neglectful parents. Nevertheless, my aunt took us into her care along with my uncle, her husband, and they proceeded to give us a good home, which is the first and foremost necessary when you're in a terrible situation like that. So I'm so grateful to her. And utterly respectful of the good that both my deceased aunt and uncle provided for me. In many ways, they saved me from probably, I would have been the victim of rape and perhaps pregnancy from one of my family members. And it was in telling my aunt the circumstances that she decided to take us into her foster care. After a few years of being raised in this new household, I was being raised as a Catholic. But unfortunately, many of the Catholic teaching that we would consider authentic was not presented. There was much good that they presented in our home, and there was a lot of care for social justice issues, and she was a very dynamic woman, very pro-education, which I, of course, was in agreement with. But as I got older, and unfortunately the human dignity aspect of humanity was not encouraged. I became increasingly aware of my aunt's pro-choice position. And I was being educated, but I would consider myself, obviously, I was a child, I was in formation. I had a lot of difficulties that I was dealing with as a teenager. And acting out of those abusive circumstances, I became sexually active. I would say not with a lot of information, but with a great desire to seek pleasure and comfort and the validity of my earlier circumstances. I wanted to make sense of all this, but it was not something that was being addressed. And I don't blame my aunt and uncle, but I think that they were focused on the education of others. As a consequence of my own actions and choices in my reproductive health, I became pregnant prior to my entering URI. I was actually going to college because, again, education was a number one issue with my aunt. And that was indeed a good. And I have to say, I was certainly fearful of telling her of my pregnancy because I already knew where she stood on that. Her message to me on a continual basis was not to not have premarital sex or not to be sexually active. It was, don't get pregnant. Don't be one man away from welfare. And many of the things that you actually heard Marianne Sorrentino, who was a contemporary of hers, I'm sure they knew each other. They certainly did by being fellow parishioners at Christ the King. But those very things that Marianne Sorrentino was telling you, I heard those messages continually. And I was afraid. I was a young person. I was ill-informed. I didn't know of my own biology even. I was heading off to college. I was in many ways ashamed, embarrassed. But I think the most important piece of all of my story, and perhaps many other women, young women, I'm talking 17, 18 years old, is that we're ill-informed. Or we're presented with untruth. A human life is not a blob of tissue. A human life is not a mass of cells. It's shocking to me that those mantras are still being espoused today to promote this agenda, and unfortunately not to promote responsible choices and responsible health care for women and for the unborn. But something someone had mentioned earlier, I wanted to address before I continue on this journey, because it is important, and I hope you can just bear with me a few more moments. Because one of the testimonies included a question of whether or not you can have thought the things like pro-choice and be contributing to Planned Parenthood, contributing to that whole agenda. If you can change your mind, and if you can become a person who promotes life and who promotes the activities of Rhode Island Right to Life. And the answer to that question is yes, that conversion can and does happen. And that conversion happened for me, certainly, but also for my mom, for my adoptive or foster mother, if you will. She changed her heart and mind. And it was because she saw the lives of my children my 5 born children. Unfortunately, I allowed the abortion of my 3 first pregnancies, those children. And I do acknowledge them as persons. But I know for sure that Deborah Thompson, if she could be here now and tell you, because it was part of her conversion story, especially at the end, at the very end of her life, when I sat with her as she lay dying, that she was heartbroken that she had gone along with this, and that it took her the 86 years of her life to fully come around to this idea. And I know that she had changed her mind earlier on, but to be a public witness about this. She had so many professional friends who were in league with Planned Parenthood, who were in league with the abortion agenda, who were educators at Brown. It was very difficult for her. I'm not making an excuse for her, because I do believe that it was not a good thing that she was not able to publicly testify, because she had been so publicly influential in so many people's lives. And she, not while she was the director of Dorcas Place, but when we went back after 25 years, a celebration, she did become painfully aware that they were taking funding from Planned Parenthood. And I know that that was a heartbreak. And I know that eventually these things that came to pass and that she realized, it was an incredible struggle. But the question, can people change their hearts and minds, even when they're embedded, when this is something that they've been espousing and promoting and perhaps even aiding women? Maybe she brought people, I don't know. Maybe she brought people to Planned Parenthood. She didn't bring me. I didn't tell her until afterwards. But we would often argue about this issue for years. And slowly but surely, her heart and mind changed. And I want to tell you, it was a both-and situation. It was just as some of these good witnesses have said, that it takes the heart and the mind. We as human beings, we're composite beings. We're a body and a soul. And we have to consider those things, that people can and do change their minds. And if presented with the truth and the right information, they will make better choices. Firstly, for their health, for their overall health. And I don't believe that that you can't have an opinion about these issues if you don't have a uterus. I think we need the good and informed testimony of men and women, both. I don't think we should be divided in any way, shape, or form about this. But I think we have been so lacking in intellectual honesty about it. We use all these euphemisms, we confuse people. If it were not for the good will of so many good men and women in my children's lives, they would be sorely confused, but thank God they are not. But I am so happy and at peace at my mother's death, because she did change her heart and mind, and she does love life. And I believe, as difficult as this is, that she would want me to speak of this, and she would want me to tell her friends, and she would want me to tell her fellow professionals, and all the people who are opposed to life, that, like she said to my uncle when she looked at the March for Life and she watched the testimonies on television while she sat with my children, her grandchildren, my children told me this. She looked at my uncle. He grumbled something. They don't know what he said, but she looked at him and she said, "You know, John, they're right. They're right about what they're doing, fighting for life." Thank you for listening to my testimony.
Thank you, Hannah. Are there any questions? Representative Ella Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a question, just really more of a statement. And I'm going to start off by apologizing for not saying this earlier in the testimony this evening. But I want to say to all of you that are here tonight and testifying, regardless of where you are on the position, the fact of the matter is you coming up and sharing some very personal information with all of us to help us see things from your perspective is something that we don't take lightly. And I, for one, really want to tell you how much I appreciate how difficult it is for you to say some of these very personal things. And knowing that you're saying them over the Capitol TV and neighbors and friends are going to be hearing what you have to say, but you're looking us in the eye and you're speaking to us from your heart. And from the bottom of mine, I want to say thank you all for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you.